Today, photographing the aftermath of Oregon's biggest wildfire with my good friend, the filmmaker Andy Adkins, my Nikon Z50 and my Nikon Z7 with the new 70-200S lens. Well, hey everybody, welcome to this week's Approaching the Scene. Thanks so much to everybody who's been liking, subscribing, sharing this channel. It makes a huge difference. As always, I'm putting a timecode link table of contents in the video description. If you just click the video's title or show more, depending on your platform, you can jump in there, see links to any videos or products that I talk about, as well as a linked time-coded table of contents so you can rewatch some section that you might want to see again. There's also a scroll bar across the video, whatever platform you're using, that has it kind of broken into chapters to play. So this week, I want to talk about kind of a fun adventure that I had last week into a really sad place. I went with my good friend Andy Adkins, who I've worked with a lot. He's an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker and just an amazing human being. And he's been working for quite some time now on a documentary about this old-growth forest in the foothills of Oregon's Cascades that was the lifelong project of a number of people to protect. He's been interviewing the people involved in that, and you know, I've been collaborating a little bit with him on that project, and then the fires blew up, and the fires blew right over that section of old growth and actually took the life of George Attia, a person who'd spent his whole life protecting that old growth forest. And we don't know what condition the forest's in yet. You can't even get back up in there. This was the big fire that I had to evacuate my mother and bring her over to our house, and Portland had the worst air quality index of any city in the country for quite a while this summer because of the smoke from that fire and a couple of other fires. And now Oregon's wildfires are taming down. Sadly, there are still some really bad fires raging in Northern California. But we got the go-ahead to go up into the zone that had burned in the Santiam fire about as far as we could go. And Andy wanted to go up in there, and given sort of the hot button politics of the day and tensions and whatnot, Andy just wanted to have two of us up there. And so we both drove up and did some photography. And I thought I'd take you on a little tour through that and talk about what I used and how impressed I am with Nikon Z50. With its little 16-50, variable aperture pancake lens, this tiny little pocket camera, and what good quality images it creates, specifically shooting into backlight. I'll show you some examples. I continue to be mightily impressed with Nikon's new 70-200 2.8S lens, and I used that a ton in this photographing the wildfire. It's kind of a challenging scene to photograph. I'll talk about that a little bit. And then at the end, I've had a number of questions about how I set up the custom settings on this lens, and I'm going to go through and show you really fast, and that may be a topic for another video, but I'll show you quick how I set mine up. I also took my 500 PF, my big long lens. I just had it in the car, and it wound up being such a complicated scene to photograph with everything just so blackened and all of these kind of haunting little details that were difficult to get to because of all the, burning little smoking embers and places with downed trees, and it was just, it was very difficult to move around in the fire zone. So I'll talk through why a long lens is nice in a really complex scene like that, sometimes to just simplify things. So let's jump in. So this is that forest fire that I kind of took you on a little journey to rescue my mom a few weeks ago in approaching the scene. I drove down into this fire. I'm going to blow this up sort of full screen view here. Or actually, you know what? I don't like full screen view because I can't show you the settings. I'm just going to maximize my view in here and make sure that you can see the settings that I have on these images. So you can see what camera. I always label my photos by the camera and then the shoot, and then you've got exposure settings here if anyone's curious. So this was just out the car window driving down to rescue my mom as I drove into all the smoke of that fire out of Portland. And then this is just the way it looked. This is the correct white balance of my mom's farm as they were evacuating the farmland below that fire. I took her up to Portland where it was safer. And then this is, later as we had those horrible air quality standards, I did a whole video about this panorama and riding around Portland, just seeing the scene through all the smoke. And this is the visibility we had in Portland for a long time. I mean, it was just terrible. We were all cooped up with my toddlers in the house, and air purifiers, HEPA filters running to filter the smoke out. And then Andy invited me to drive up into the North Fork of the Santiam River. The North Fork is, the small little northern fork of the river that flows down. The Santiam River flows down into the Willamette River in Salem. And it's where I grew up. I grew up in a really small little farm town, Turner, Oregon. And we recreated up there. I learned to swim in that river in the North Fork of the Santiam. It's a beautiful little river with wonderful swimming holes and lots of people's recreational cabins, and a few folks live up there. And then up above it all is this spectacular old growth, Opal Creek, that flows down into the North Fork. So Andy and I drove up there. It was haunting to kind of drive through. I'll have to say it's just weird driving along, seeing that river that I know so well that you normally just caught glimpses of because of all the foliage and the trees burned to a crisp and no needles and no leaves. And so you just see the river as if it's kind of flowing through a war zone. And every now and then there's a house that's untouched, and then a bunch of foundations and pieces of houses, and then a little section of woods that's untouched. And the way the fire jumps some spots and scorches others. So we drove up the road, Andy and I, and we stopped at a place where he had recently done an interview with someone for his documentary who'd been involved in protecting that watershed. And he had literally sat at this table, which was behind the person's home alongside the river, and done an interview just a week and a half before. There's that person's fuel tank there. And it was just kind of haunting. I got out and I just started photographing, and I was photographing with the Z50 and finding it just difficult. The scene is so blackened and so charred and kind of monochromatic orange and black, and it was, a blue sky day, that I found myself gravitating toward the 70-200 on the Nikon Z7 instead. I had this slung on my side with my QD on my LumaLabs strap. And then I had my 500 just in the little shoulder bag that it came with, where I could switch the 70-200 in it really easily. So I just had those three things. The Z50 fit in my little sweat jacket pocket. And, just seeing these places, for some reason the little holly around the gate isn't burned and all the trees and everything else is. They've got a no trespassing sign up, and just, the burned out places that people were enjoying so recently, and now they're starting to clear out again, and just burned street signs and forest and trees and just rubble. Here's one that I took with the 500 millimeter because everything was just such a mess, and I wanted to show that there's a pickup truck and all that. And so I actually spent a lot of time framing up this composition of chaos to bring your eye to that pickup truck, and the 500 millimeter worked for me. And I couldn't really get closer because you'd have to wade through so much burnt debris. Here's a place where I spent a lot of time in my youth, and both in my young days swimming with my parents, and then in my high school days hanging out with friends. This place, Salmon Falls, is this beautiful waterfall along the river with a swimming hole right at the base of it, and we used to jump off the rocks into the swimming hole. And for some reason, the fire didn't burn the bathroom in the parking lot, but a giant tree fell on it anyway. And then we got up to the top of the road. We drove up further to where road crews were clearing kind of the last of the fire debris, cutting trees off the road, and then finally we got to the point where they hadn't gone any further, and we couldn't either. And we stopped, and this was a place where the fire had just burned so ridiculously hot. And Andy was up there. He was doing a little bit of film work. He was kind of moving his camera on a slider and filming, the aftermath of this fire. And I thought about, he's doing this documentary about this area, and now the fire obviously plays a major role in his film. So I started doing some portraits, and I just love this new 70-200 millimeter. for doing portrait work. The eye detect with the Z cameras combined with this camera's sharpness wide open just gives you a haunting ability to make beautiful portraits. And I was taking these really silky smooth blurred background wide open shot, and then I thought, oh, I really want to show that it's a burnt forest, and I stopped down to 5.6, kind of moved back. And I mean, if you're curious how sharp this thing is at f2.8, it's really, really sharp at f2.8. It's just a beautiful, beautiful lens. And it's my favorite so far. Just to give you an idea of where I was working, I took a shot with my Z50 at the 16 to 50 lens, and this is 16 millimeters on APS-C. That's about 24 millimeters. It shows you the scene from a different perspective here, how just using a different focal length can really change your perspective. It was a challenging thing to make really good images in the mid-daylight. As the light got better, it got easier, but in that blue sky day with this burnt forest, it was really nice to have the longer lens to just scoop in and show details and not have the wider world. To me, it seemed a day where in a scene where the longer lens was made to work. And I actually took this photo just to kind of showcase that. Looking up that road. Andy doing a little bit of work. I got some video of him moving around in the slider, and we were up here as the sun came down. This scene, I'm just looking at these trees. I've never actually been in a berm before where the trees exploded, and you can see some of these trees, obviously the sap boiled inside and they just exploded. The burnt street signs. This is with the 70 to 200 again. Andy flew his drone around a bit, got some fun drone footage even of me hiking through the forest. He shot me this one scene just to include in the video. He's got the new, well, not new, he has the newer of the Mavic Pros. I have the original Mavic Pro. He has the Mavic Pro with the wide aperture Hasselblad lens, and it really does beautiful cinematic drone work. And then I was kind of thinking, as the sun set in this forest, I'd test out the 70 to 200's ability to shoot into backlight, and I got a lot less ghosting and flare than I'm used to. Even with the FLED, this lens is definitely better shooting into backlight. And since I have my fluid head there, I set up and just shot a little bit of video of that burnt forest with the sun setting behind it. And then, as the sun came down, I thought about it, and I've actually done some work with my little Z50 and found that it shoots into backlight really well. It handles high contrast scenes quite well. And this little 16 to 50 millimeter lens, I remember testing it when I was on my Joshua Tree scouting trip last spring and being shocked at what a good Sunstar it threw. And so we had this burnt out sign, and I started sort of thinking about it. I was trying to frame up something with the light on the highway, and the sun was just too much in the scene. And then I thought, oh, I'll make a Sunstar with the burnt out corner sign. And this little lens, 16 millimeters, stopped all the way down to f22. It did a really fine Sunstar. Nice, clean Sunstar. Bravo, little Z50 with tiny lens. I mean, it really is a surprisingly great and powerful little camera. So fun to carry alongside the big camera. And then I shot it after the sun had gone down to just kind of get that stark scene I had been imagining. So that's basically my trip up through those woods. After we were done, we drove down through the town of Gates, and we did see that the citizens had kind of a checkpoint set up where they were photographing everyone coming through, but nobody hassled us, and we were able to head home to our families. And just it was it's been hard to kind of think about that place that I spent so much time in my youth years and years ago. I mean, I really have these great memories of being 6 and 4, 5, 6 years old with my dad teaching me to swim in that little river right where we just were, and all my days in high school with other kids swimming at the river, sometimes skipping school to swim at the river, and it's tough to think of that all being charred. That fire blew up from being, I think Andy told me it was something like 500 acres, and he was really worried about Opal Creek, to being, a couple 100,000 acres just overnight when the flames blew up. When the winds came, we had huge winds from the east. So, You know, that's a little adventure I was able to get out with a good friend. We took separate cars. We wore face masks when we were together, and we went out and did a little documenting. And I'm excited to get in and see what happened to Opal Creek when they get the roads opened up further and we can go up and explore a little bit. We might get early access because of the work that he's doing to go in and do a little backpacking investigation before the general public gets in there. So I'm excited to do that. I've had a couple of questions about how I set up the custom controls that are available on this new 70-200 S lens. And I'm not gonna go through and do a full menu driven thing. I'm actually thinking about updating my Z6 and Z7 guides and including lens controls in that setup guide. But for those of you that have it, a couple cool notes. One, Kirk has come out with this replacement foot with the QD port on it. It's lighter than the original. It's got a built-in Arca dovetail. It's light. It's really nice, really solid. I dig it. I'll put a link to that in the video description as well. And there are 3 cool controls on this. One, back here right up near the mount that honestly I didn't even notice or read about, and one of my good friends and workshop compadres, Charlie Johnson on the South Oregon coast, said, what did you set your back dial up to? And I honestly hadn't even noticed. It just looks like part of the mount. There's a killer little 3rd ring back here that your thumb rests right up against if you're uptight to the camera, that you can spin, and it's separate from the zoom ring and the focus ring. There's a 3rd ring, and that is great to set up for exposure compensation. That's how my buddy Charlie set his up. And when you're working with the long lens, say you're shooting birds in flight, you can just dial that bad boy and immediately set or reset exposure compensation. Just dial in a negative stop if you're shooting birds in flight against a clear blue sky and make sure that you're exposing them right. And then there are 2 other custom buttons. The forward custom button is is function 2, and that's up near the zoom ring, which is normally where I'm holding this lens while I work with it. I'll rotate my foot up out of the way here. While I'm working with it, I'm typically, zooming and using autofocus with my back thumb on the AF on button. And so with this button, I'm typically, when I'm photographing action and fast moving subjects, I like to be in auto area mode, in autofocus continuous, and then auto area autofocus mode. And so that mode, if you choose, you can highlight a subject tracking box and track subjects with that and activate that and deactivate that. So sometimes I want to not have that tracking box and let the camera decide what I'm moving with and capture. And sometimes I want that tracking box. So I set that button to just activate and deactivate that tracking box. Simple as that. And then the back button, I like to put to play, because typically play is way back here on the back of the camera body on the left side. And to hit it, I have to kind of reach my hand off the lens and come back and hit it, or else bring my right hand around to hit it. And if I'm looking through the viewfinder and I want to review the last images I shot, it's as simple as hitting that with my thumb. I don't even have to look out. And then if I tap the shutter button, I'm back into shooting mode. So it's a quick way to check if that last shot worked out or not without ever taking my hands out of my control positions. So subject tracking, play, and exposure compensation. Really cool modes to set that up with. Just make sure that when you use the exposure compensation on the ring, you reset it to 0 when you're done so you don't screw up the next series of shots that you're working with. All right, so that's essentially that. We've got our project panoramas. I have that filled up, sadly, in about a day and a half. I mean, it's a great thing that it filled up in a day and a half, but I wish there was room for more people because we've had a lot of demand. We have a waiting list. But that project is kicking off next Thursday. I've been doing my office hours I do for photographers during the pandemic, a free Zoom meeting where we just all get together, talk about photography, talk about different topics, share images, and do Q&As with Rick and Darren and Woody, and often David Archer pops in there to help discuss stuff. People that run workshops with me and work with me, and we have a great time. We had a really nice, actually, I'm filming this on Tuesday, and we had a nice office hours today about hand-holding versus tripod photography. We're gonna take a couple of weeks off, and we're actually gonna be doing the next set of office hours on November 3rd. That's right, a diversion on Election Day. So get out there and vote, but also sign up for the office hours, you can go to hudsonhenry.com/office hours, and you can submit a question that we'll take. I love it when people are in the Zoom so I can see their faces while we're having the meeting, and we can have the chat line and I can see questions as they pop up live, but it's also streaming on YouTube if you want to join that way. So sign up, contribute to that. We're also going to have a gallery, and we're going to ask for people to submit a photo you took this fall. It's such a colorful time of year. There's so much craziness going on. Let's make some beautiful fall photos, share them, and we'll go through that gallery during the office hours on November 3rd. So I really hope to see you there. Again, thanks so much to everybody who's been supporting this channel. It makes a huge world of difference. I really appreciate everyone using my links too. I put those up in the video description, but they're always at hudsonhenry.com/ATS-gear. And that makes a big difference for my family. You know, I get slight commissions from Amazon, B&H, Kirk, Acrotech, and Hoya, so I appreciate that, everybody. All right, thanks so much. We'll see you next week. Stay safe and keep being out there photographing.